And in a speech that ran roughly 1 hour, the President of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, said, and I quote, "The shadow of crisis has passed. The State of the Union is strong." In the President's words, we turn the page, and as you heard him during that hour, make several references to the letter of a young mother from the Twin Cities of Minnesota seated with the First Lady. We've all gone through some tough times, but America is on the way back. It was a speech by definition given by a chief executive in a role where, regardless of party, a president will be aspirational. But it is worth noting that even as he called for unanimity of purpose, when it came to the political angle, and he said that he had run his last campaign to cheers from the Republican side, he could not resist the aside, I won both of them, conveniently forgetting the midterm elections. But Miranda Codd, such is the give and take of American politics.
Yeah, we heard over and over again, he kept talking about middle-class economics, and his words exactly, verdict is middle-class economics works. Your reaction?
Well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll get the reaction of our friends because I've got a lot to say, but we have the ability to call on folks who have joined us. First from Newsmax, New York, we're pleased to have the former Lieutenant Governor of New York State, Betsy McCoy, on hand there, along with John Fund. And from Newsmax, Washington, we have our good friend John Gizzi. And much was made of a tax plan. There's your middle class economics. But it was interesting tonight that he didn't go into chapter and verse other than to say the predictable notion of fair share. John Fund, if I could go to you, the whole notion of, quote, middle class tax cuts and the fair share, is that borne out in current tax law in terms of who is paying the most in taxes?
No, of course not. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer in this country. And they have every year that President Obama has been in office. There's an old cliche that the devil is in the details. Well, there are two devils lurking in this president's tax plan he didn't want to discuss. The inheritance tax will go double. It will go up by twice for many Americans. Now, that's the kind of tax that's very punitive. It's clearly the quintessential class warfare tax. That's a tax increase that even Bill Clinton shied away from. Then you go to the capital gains tax. Bill Clinton was famous for cutting the capital gains tax that helped spur economic growth and job creation when he was president. President Obama wants to raise it from 15% to about 28%. How is that going to help grow the economy? So the president is masking what is effectively redistributionist liberal economics as a middle-class program. But we look at the results. The last 6 or 7 years, his stimulus plan failed. His tax plan has made the country more unequal. And if we go by results, why should we buy a tax plan from this used car salesman?
Betsy, I see you there reacting, itching to say something.
Let me point out that middle-class economics is bad news for the family that was featured tonight, Rebecca and Ben and their two sons. Ben is struggling to build a construction business. Under the president's tax proposals, he's going to pay a higher rate because unlike the big corporations that pay the corporate tax rate, someone like Ben pays the individual tax rate, just like many partnerships and joint proprietorships. So the fact is, this is very bad news for Ben and Rebecca. It's also bad news that when Ben's trying to build this business, if he gets socked with mandatory sick leave, mandatory maternity leave, and so many other regulations that make it more expensive to give someone a job, he's not going to be able to hire more people. It's people like Ben, the small proprietors, the small businesses that are the job creators in this country. And Obama's proposed tax policies will prevent Ben and other small businesses from creating new jobs.
In fact, I'll just add to what Betsy said. The president was trying some poll-tested ideas to try to garner support. For example, paid sick leave. Well, polls show, yes, people do support paid sick leave when they also aren't talked about the costs of paid sick leave. The president cleverly said that wherever paid sick leave was on the ballot last fall, it won. Well, it was on the ballot in precisely one state, which he did not dare to mention. That was Massachusetts, the most liberal state in the country, which is 10 to 15 points more liberal than the country as a whole. Even in Massachusetts, paid sick leave after a debate only got less than 60% of the vote. So the president is selling something that I think becomes much less popular the more people know that there are actual costs in terms of job creation attached to it.
This is
And
not a
let
tax
me-
on
could
the
I-
rich.
We appreciate your perspective from New York. Let's go to Newsmax Washington, bring in our good friend John Gizzi. John, you're a veteran of many of these speeches. The president delivered one skillfully tonight, but your takeaway from this as you heard that hour-plus speech.
Well, at the beginning of this program, JD and Miranda, I said that the president was taking a page from the book of Senator Elizabeth Warren, shown standing and applauding vigorously at different points in tonight's address. Sure enough, the boldprogressives.org praised President Obama with a headline, and their press release reads, and I quote, "Obama sounded like Warren, and it's a good thing." This is expansionist government, and as John pointed out earlier, is going to be a nicely weighed, sugar-coated tax increase. Already, Republicans I talked to on Capitol Hill are going to focus on that as their point of attack. The capital gains tax increase from 15 to 28% being their major target. Congressman Jimmy Duncan of Tennessee reminded this reporter that middle-class tax relief was last passed under Republicans in the 80s when his father, also a congressman, was the ranking Republican on the Tax Writing Ways and Means Committee. You will not see, according to these Republicans, anything approaching a capital gains tax increase see the light of day because it will stifle small business and opportunity.
To our panel, let me just interject that we are awaiting momentarily the Republican response. Brother Gizzi mentioned the Republican Party, and Joni Ernst, the freshman United States Senator, will be offering that Republican response. Miranda, it is interesting when you study the life and resume of Joni Ernst as she prepares to step now onto the national stage.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I hope that the curse doesn't follow her like it has Jindal and Rubio as it did in the past. It can be a little tricky to get this thing done just right. I want to go back to our panel real quickly. John Gizzi, you were talking about the overall tone. Were there any oh my moments there?
Well, I think, for example, when he uses the phrase, let us all play under a fair set of rules, and then adds, I'm talking about bringing the cost of community college down to zero. Again, people don't want to say socialist, but they do say redistributionist. For my part, and JD will love this, both of those reference to free higher education and to fair share of rules are directly from the manifesto of the Social Democratic Party of Germany under Willy Brandt in 1969. And again, it's for a greater hand in the state in things like education as well as fairness. And my feeling is that none of this will see the light of day because he's already drawn the line in the sand and knows fully well what the outcome will be.
Betsy McCoy, you are our health care specialist, not only having past experience in elective politics, but being a PhD and being, I don't think you mind the term, policy wonk. We heard tonight from the president
That's right.
that what is this we heard about a precision medicine initiative?
Well, it's
what was he
very
saying?
interesting. He didn't flesh it out, and I'd like to hear more about it. He also, it might be noted, only had a passing reference to Obamacare. He, of course, exaggerated by many millions the number of people who were newly insured under Obamacare, but you can tell that he only wanted to touch and pivot from that topic because Obamacare remains so unpopular. On the issue of medical innovation, what struck me about this is that when you look at the great innovations in medicine, they haven't been produced by government. They've been produced in the private sector, by scientists working for universities or for pharmaceutical companies or in small laboratories, startup companies. So when the president promises that he's going to develop this, it's kind of pie in the sky. The fact is, it's just another part of his overall theme of government. Government's going to set the mortgage rates. Government's going to tell employers how they hire and what they pay people. It's big government at its biggest.
Also, some other memorable moments from the President's State of the Union. He talked about the resolution to authorize force against ISIS, asking for that, and of course, saying it's time to close Gitmo. Let's listen to what the President had to say again.
Now it is time to finish the job, and I will not relent in my determination to shut it down. It is not who we are. It's time to close Gitmo.
Let me turn to John Fund. We should also point out there was a reaction shot from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Understand that by custom, because they are apolitical, non-political, they will not applaud or react because there's a clear line between civilian command and military in a subordinate role. That is why the stoicism you see there on the faces of the members of the Joint Chiefs. But such stoicism we do not expect from our friend John Fund. John, to hear again the notion that Gitmo actually creates terrorists when terrorism was around long before Gitmo was opened, does that really poll well with the American people?
Well, it depends on who you poll. For those Americans who read the headlines that yet another person we've released from Gitmo has joined back with the terrorists and is blowing Americans up in some country, whether it be Iraq or Syria or Pakistan or Afghanistan, you have to wonder. Obviously, Gitmo it's tragic that we have to have such a facility, but tragedy sometimes is combined with necessity. And the president has not closed Gitmo after 6 years of trying for a very good reason. It would lead to more terrorism and more endangered American lives.
John Gizzi, I want to ask you about the resolution that the president is asking for to authorize force against ISIS. What's your reaction?
Yeah. Obviously, he is going to have some help from the rest of the world. This afternoon, I heard remarks from the foreign minister of the European Union, Federico Mogherini, who talked about greater cooperation between the European Union and the United States, transatlantic partnership. Whatever authorization he gets from Congress to deal with ISIS is going to have to be underscored and backed by some kind of unity with our allies across the ocean. It's that simple.
Did it seem kind of vague to you, though? He didn't really go into great detail about it. It was just simply that.
No, he didn't. And again, I think it's because he's been banking on allies around the world weighing in on this before he does. He had meetings last week with Prime Minister David Cameron, who supported him in opposing further sanctions on Iran. It would not surprise me if he's discussed with the Prime Minister or President Hollande of France or Chancellor Merkel of Germany about some kind of alliance to deal with ISIS. But again, Congress will just not give him a blank check to have a unilateral operation in that part of the world.
And of course, while he may have conversations and discussions, and while we hear there is going to be a summit about dealing with extremism, Betsy McCoy, on one hand, you have the president calling for that resolution for use of force against ISIS. On the other hand, portraying himself as someone who is taking, quote, the more responsible approach to foreign policy, rather than involving our military at the drop of a hat. That's a paraphrase. Your take on the effort to kind of have it both ways. Go ahead.
It's really a fantasy foreign policy in many ways. He's diminishing the threat of Muslim extremism, Islamic extremism around the world, and in fact, repudiating those who point out that this is a religious ideology that threatens us. I also found it actually very quaint that he was asking for a resolution authorization for the use of force, because in general the president has shown very little concern with acting within the constitutional boundaries of the executive branch. And even in the speech tonight, he made it clear that he's going to do everything he can, not only within his executive power, but perhaps beyond it, in the areas of climate change.
Thank you very much. Hate to interrupt.
and
We have the
regulation.
Republican response now. Iowa Senator Joni Ernst offers that. Let's join it.
As a mother, a soldier, and a newly elected senator from the great state of Iowa, I am proud to speak with you tonight. A few moments ago, we heard the president lay out his vision for the year to come. Even if we may not always agree, it's important to hear different points of view in this great country. We appreciate the president sharing his. Tonight, though, rather than respond to a speech, I'd like to talk about your priorities. I'd like to have a conversation about the new Republican Congress you just elected and how we plan to make Washington focus on your concerns again. We heard the message you sent in November, loud and clear, and now we're getting to work to change the direction Washington has been taking our country. The new Republican Congress also understands how difficult these past 6 years have been. For many of us, the sting of the economy and the frustration with Washington's dysfunction weren't things we had to read about. We felt them every day. We felt them in Red Oak, the little town in southwestern Iowa where I grew up and am still proud to call home today. As a young girl, I plowed the fields of our family farm. I worked construction with my dad. To save for college, I worked the morning biscuit line at Hardee's. We were raised to live simply, not to waste. It was a lesson my mother taught me every rainy morning. You see, growing up, I had only one good pair of shoes. So on rainy school days, my mom would slip plastic bread bags over them to keep them dry. But I was never embarrassed because the school bus would be filled with rows and rows of young Iowans with bread bags slipped over their feet. Our parents may not have had much, but they worked hard for what they did have. These days, though, many families feel like they're working harder and harder with less and less to show for it, not just in Red Oak, but across the country. We see our neighbors agonize over stagnant wages and lost jobs. We see the hurt caused by canceled health care plans and higher monthly insurance bills. We see too many moms and dads put their own dreams on hold while growing more fearful about the kind of future they'll be able to leave to their children. Americans have been hurting, but when we demanded solutions too often, Washington responded with the same stale mindset that led to failed policies like Obamacare. It's a mindset that gave us political talking points, not serious solutions. That's why the new Republican majority you elected started by reforming Congress to make it function again. And now we're working hard to pass the kind of serious job creation ideas you deserve. One you've probably heard about is the Keystone Jobs Bill. President Obama has been delaying this bipartisan infrastructure project for years, even though many members of his party, unions, and a strong majority of Americans support it. The president's own State Department has said Keystone's construction could support thousands of jobs and pump billions into our economy, and do it with minimal environmental impact. We worked with Democrats to pass this bill through the House. We're doing the same now in the Senate. President Obama will soon have a decision to make. Will he sign the bill or block good American jobs? There's a lot we can achieve if we work together. Let's tear down trade barriers in places like Europe and the Pacific. Let's sell more of what we make and grow in America over there so we can boost manufacturing wages and jobs right here at home. Let's simplify America's outdated and loophole-ridden tax code. Republicans think tax filing should be easier for you, not just the well-connected. So let's iron out loopholes to lower rates and create jobs, not pay for more government spending. The president has already expressed some support for these kinds of ideas. We're calling on him now to cooperate to pass them. You'll see a lot of serious work in this new Congress. Some of it will occur where I stand tonight, in the Armed Services Committee room. This is where I'll join committee colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, to discuss ways to support our exceptional military and its mission. This is where we'll debate strategies to confront terrorism and the threats posed by Al-Qaeda, ISIL, and those radicalized by them. We know threats like these can't just be wished away. We've been reminded of terrorism's reach, both at home and abroad, most recently in France and Nigeria, but also in places like Canada and Australia. Our hearts go out to all the innocent victims of terrorism and their loved ones. We can only imagine the depth of their grief. For 2 decades, I've proudly worn our nation's uniform, today as a lieutenant colonel in the Iowa Army National Guard. While deployed overseas with some of America's finest men and women, I've seen just how dangerous these kinds of threats can be. The forces of violence and oppression don't care about the innocent. We need a comprehensive plan to defeat them. We must also honor America's veterans. These men and women have sacrificed so much in defense of our freedoms and our way of life. They deserve nothing less than the benefits they were promised and a quality of care we can all be proud of. These are important issues the new Congress plans to address. We'll also keep fighting to repeal and replace a health care law that's hurt so many hardworking families. We'll work to correct executive overreach. We'll propose ideas that aim to cut wasteful spending and balance the budget with meaningful reforms, not higher taxes like the president has proposed. We'll advance solutions to prevent the kind of cyber attacks we've seen recently. We'll work to confront Iran's nuclear ambitions. And we'll defend life because protecting our most vulnerable is an important measure of any society. Congress is back to work on your behalf, ready to make Washington focus on your concerns again. We know America faces big challenges, but history has shown there's nothing our nation and our people can't accomplish. Just look at my parents and grandparents. They had very little to call their own except the sweat on their brow and the dirt on their hands. But they worked, they sacrificed, and they dreamed big dreams for their children and grandchildren. And because they did, an ordinary Iowan like me has had some truly extraordinary opportunities because they showed me that you don't need to come from wealth or privilege to make a difference. You just need the freedom to dream big and a whole lot of hard work. The new Republican Congress you elected is working to make Washington understand that too. And with a little cooperation from the president, we can get Washington working again. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you tonight. May God bless this great country of ours, the brave Americans serving in uniform on our behalf, and you, the hardworking men and women who make the United States of America the greatest nation the world has ever known.
Speaking from the Senate Armed Services Committee room, 44-year-old Army National Guard combat veteran and freshman Senator Joni Ernst, with the Republican response that she cautioned, Miranda, was not really a response to the president's speech, a conversation with the American people to basically remind the people that though the president paid scant attention to the results of the midterm election, it brought her to Washington and brought a new Senate in as well.
Why do you think Republicans selected her to
Well,
give this response?
I think it's
which
obvious.
you said really wasn't a response.
It's a good question that we'll ask the panel. And let's go to Betsy McCoy, who, of course, was elected Lieutenant Governor of New York State. Your reaction to Joni Ernst, and was a political star born tonight for the GOP?
Well, she did a good job, but the fact is, despite the disclaimer, it was a response to the president in a very important sense. It reminded the American people that they elected a Republican majority in both houses of Congress, so the president's opposition is in charge. Number two, on the issue of spending, the president was bragging that he cut the deficit in half, but deficit reduction is just another excuse for tax hikes. The fact is, he has doubled the national debt during his term in office. So the Republicans underscored the importance of controlling spending and reducing the burden on the American people and on future generations. So I thought this was very much a response to the president.
John Gizzi, do you agree?
Yes, very much so. And Joni Ernst did an outstanding job. I would have to say that she was selected for this not because of what she had to say, but who she was. She has a very unique American success story, from humble beginnings on the farm in the Hawkeye State to service with the military to elective office, and finally as her state's first woman ever to serve in Congress. And that was what impressed voters in Iowa last fall. I think her message resonated, particularly when she spoke of debt. And it was a nice point that while the president referred to a woman's right to choose, she talked about the right to life and protecting the most vulnerable. She drew the line very clearly between the political parties and spared nothing. I give her an A.
John Fund, as we again see the footage of Joni Ernst speaking there from the Senate Armed Services Committee, you deal with themes as I'll say this in the most polite, a word merchant. You are gifted with the written word. Joni Ernst, with a spoken word tonight, tried to establish her humble beginnings. Talked about Red Oak, Iowa, and the family farm. What to you was the most memorable part of her, close to maybe a little more than 15-minute response to the president tonight?
Well, it's a cliche to say someone is down to earth, but she obviously reached a lot of Americans who work with their hands, who come from a blue-collar background, who have veterans in their family. I had the privilege of having breakfast with her last Thursday at the Republican Congressional Retreat, one-on-one, and I was struck. I mean, I've met a lot of obscure state legislators, but now I understand how she was able to vaunt over so many men and become senator in Iowa. In fact, the first woman ever elected to Congress from Iowa. And she has a remarkable political talent of being able to size up a situation, express it in common sense terms, and her life story. I mean, at 44, to have served in the country's National Guard for 20 years, to have served overseas, to be a successful businesswoman, to have authored legislation in the legislature. We're going to hear a lot more about Joni Ernst. We're probably going to hear at some point in the future about Joni Ernst as a potential vice president or presidential candidate.
And mindful of that, Betsy McCoy, we cannot help but note the fact that Joni Ernst succeeded Tom Harkin in the United States Senate. Tom Harkin, one of the most liberal members of that body. Tom Harkin, an unabashed advocate of federal takeover of medicine, a la Obamacare. So again, and of course we should point out that Joni Ernst graces the cover of this month's Newsmax magazine, so no cover jinx there. But Betsy, she said that this new Congress was committed to repeal and replace the president's health care program. Do you think
and
they
they
can
may
get it
get
done?
the opportunity very soon because the United States Supreme Court is ruling in a pivotal case, King versus Burwell. And if the court rules as is expected, it will really undercut the subsidies that are offered on the Obamacare exchanges, and Obamacare will be over very quickly. So Congress needs to be ready by June with an alternative that will provide health reform to those who need help paying for health plans without imposing these mandates and job-killing regulations on the public.
John Fund, the notion of actual repeal of Obamacare, Betsy says the Supreme Court will set the stage for it. Will Mitch McConnell move forward in that way, or are we going to see caution from the Senate leader?
Well, the Supreme Court decision is absolutely vital. If the exchanges are declared unconstitutional, it changes the entire Obamacare ballgame. So I think that what the Republicans need to do, and that's what they were discussing in the congressional retreat that I spoke at last week, they're discussing presenting a series of steps that will accommodate Obamacare should the exchanges be declared unconstitutional, so they can assure the people who are currently getting health insurance that there will be minimal disruption, but also that there will be free market approaches to Obamacare. Repealing Obamacare is obviously the goal, but it's going to come in sequential steps, because so long as the president has the veto and a party that is going to back him up to the point of being able to sustain his vetoes, we are going to have to be able to take, I wouldn't call it salami slices, I would call it whacks at Obamacare. And I think we can do that. If Obamacare is the exchanges are declared unconstitutional, the states can demand complete Medicaid freedom, that they're not going to cooperate with Obamacare unless they get relieved from the federal burdens and mandates, and the Congress can demand all kinds of things for Obamacare to be changed. If the president doesn't want to throw between 6 and 8 million people who currently have health insurance into turmoil, he needs to compromise. We've heard no compromise from this president. The Republicans have to prepare a compromise that he either vetoes and reveals his obstinacy and his inflexibility, or he takes, and that means Obamacare will be a shadow of its former self.
And there'll be
mindful of
plenty
that,
of Democratic votes to support that compromise.
and that's a key point. Now, let's go overseas again, because, again, having Joni Ernst deliver the Republican response from the Armed Services Committee highlights a difference in approach to national security. President Obama made it clear tonight, we're going to hear his words again, about possible sanctions against Iran. Let's take a listen.
Between now and this spring, we have a chance to negotiate a comprehensive agreement that prevents a nuclear-armed Iran, secures America and our allies, including Israel, while avoiding yet another Middle East conflict. There are no guarantees that negotiations will succeed, and I keep all options on the table to prevent a nuclear Iran. And that's why I will veto any new sanctions bill that threatens to undo this progress.
John Gizzi, a report just coming out, I believe, in the UK Guardian about intelligence, talking about an Iranian-inspired attack on Israel in which Hezbollah participates. With that kind of intelligence against that backdrop, for this president to insist on Congress not imposing sanctions, it sets up at least a conflict here politically.
Very much so, and it diminishes the case that people who would be in the president's camp saying just wait can make, but it has to be verified first. And again, I cite what the foreign minister of the European Union, Federico Mogherini, said this afternoon, and that is that there has to be a greater transatlantic alliance, whether it's on sanctions against Russia dealing with Ukraine or against Iran if it fails to comply with disarming its nuclear musketry. But again, plots against other country and evidence that Iran is planning action outside its own borders, particularly against Israel, make the case a lot weaker for holding off on tougher sanctions.
Let's see, what do you think about the president's comments?
The president's comment weakened the United States' position in this negotiation with Iran by promising that he would veto the imposition of tougher sanctions. It weakened American representatives at the bargaining table.
Mindful of that, John Fund, it was interesting. I was struck tonight in the speech by the fact that, in essence, President Obama called out Vladimir Putin, talking about Russia and making fun of some pundits and some on the other side of the aisle, saying he was not forceful enough against Putin. Is that revisionist history, or have we seen the president move to a kind of insouciance in dealing with the Russians?
Well, the president has shown such weakness in so many areas in foreign policy. I guess he wanted to pick some target that he could beat up on, and I think the most bipartisan applause he got tonight was when he attacked Vladimir Putin. However, I have to say, it's better to be lucky than good, and in this case, the president was very lucky. No one could have anticipated that since last June, which was long after Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea and started stirring up trouble, the price of oil has fallen by over 50%. So when he says the Russian economy is in tatters, A, that's an exaggeration, but B, to the extent the Russian economy is really suffering, it's out of pure dumb luck. This president has done everything possible to keep American oil and natural gas in the ground. Not a single bit of the natural gas and oil we've found and discovered and developed since he took office has been on federal government land. It's all been on private land. The president has tried very much to keep our natural resources in the ground. The fact that he wasn't able to succeed in doing that helped propel the downward pressure on oil prices and has made Vladimir Putin fall into economic hardship. But the president had nothing to do with that. It was dumb luck and the fact that the price of oil is more powerful than his attempts to keep it on the ground.
I heard you talking about gas. Let's bring up Keystone again, because we heard Joni Ernst bring it up. Any plans you think that we're going to see that come back into fruition?
Well, I smiled when the president said that in place of one pipeline, he had a big infrastructure program planned. That was the way he got over the Keystone issue, kind of touched and moved on. But the fact is, preventing the building of the Keystone pipeline is very unpopular with the public, even with many members of his own party.
John Gizzi, I heard you getting ready to say something, and I think we cut you off. What were you going to say?
Certainly, Congress came within one vote. The Senate actually came within one vote of getting Keystone to first base. Now it's very likely it will get there. It will go to the president's desk, and he will veto it. Press Secretary Josh Earnest has made that clear in the past. The president was very dismissive, talking about faster trains and a faster internet will go higher than a single pipeline. So my guess is he's made up his mind on this. Joni Ernst made a very cogent case that we're going to hear repeated in the debate in Congress in the coming days, but we can expect a veto from the White House.
And given the rough and tumble, even in this august format of a State of the Union message, the fact that Joni Ernst offered the Republican response also was good, because the president went back to the war on women, and he spoke not only about health care for women, but about wages for women. Let's take a listen to that.
Nothing helps families make ends meet like higher wages. That's why this Congress still needs to pass a law that makes sure a woman is paid the same as a man for doing the same work.
About a minute remains. John Fund, very quickly, your reaction to that remark.
Well, it's wonderful demagoguery, but it simply isn't true. If you adjust for the fact that women often have children and leave the workforce temporarily, if you look at different job career tracks that women have, of course there's some disparity between male and female wages. But to think that the federal government, with its giant invisible foot, can come down and solve this problem, which takes place around workplaces all over the country, from one employee to 50,000 employees, is preposterous. It's easily expressed demagoguery and nothing else.
Fair enough. And on that note, we will offer our thanks not only to John Fund and Betsy McCoy from Newsmax New York, but the redoubtable, intrepid John Gizzi, festooned with that fedora from Newsmax Washington. To you all, we thank you for your insights and analysis, and we look forward to more discussion in the days ahead. Miranda Kahn, great to be with you on this coverage.
It was wonderful. Had a
And
great
in
time.
just a few hours' time, we'll be back at 9 a.m. Eastern for America's Forum here on Newsmax TV. To those you see and those you don't who play such a big role in this programming, they too have our thanks, most of all to you at home for being here for our coverage. We are going to join now in progress Intelligence Squared debate. Stay brave, stay free, stay tuned, and thanks for watching.